Out of all the awesome games releasing this year, I really wasn't expecting the controversial one to be Resident Evil 3. The marketing cycle for this game has been awesome from start to finish ever since Capcom announced that they were working on this in tandem with Resident Evil 2's incredible remake. And just like with that game, I missed this one the first time it released on PS1 because I was around 5 or 6 years old, but I did get to play Resident Evil Revelations, of which Jill is also the main character. So I was really excited to see how they'd modernize and bring her to life in the same way they did with Claire and Leon in Resident Evil 2, and I guess kinda Chris Redfield in RE7. Right out of the gate, it sets a more action-focused tone by showing a live-action TV broadcast that lets you know everything is going to in the city, and then it promptly throws you into a scripted escape sequence against Nemesis. It's a great intro, it starts really strong and really quick, and it just throws you into the gameplay, which is something I really appreciate. It's obviously a lot different than the gas station intro in Resident Evil 2, which taught you how to play the game, but honestly, I'm glad this one just throws you right into it, because again, the tone is completely different in Resident Evil 3. This time around, you're mainly going to be playing as Jill Valentine, who's one of the surviving STARS members from the first Resident Evil. You'll also get to play a couple levels as Carlos Oliveira, and he's a mercenary who's working for Umbrella on their biohazard countermeasure service. When I saw Carlos in the trailer, I wasn't really expecting to like him, but his plotline of figuring out that he's a good guy working for a really bad company is honestly pretty compelling, and it all comes to a head in the hospital later in the game when he realizes that yeah, Umbrella is bad, they caused this outbreak, and they really don't care. They're studying it from afar to see the effects of the T-virus, and they're taking all of the blame and shifting it away from themselves. It's a great cutscene, it's an awesome moment, and I liked him a lot by the end of the game. And as far as Jill goes, in my opinion, she's perfect. Since the game was announced though, there have been a ton of complaints about her new look, but just like with Claire, the updates to her design make her look, you know, actually believable as a character who could survive in a situation like this. Another update from Capcom that's upsetting the same group of people is that they updated her classic costume to be a little bit more practical, so this time around she's wearing shorts instead of a skirt, and honestly, I don't see the problem there either. She's in the zombie apocalypse. She's not going out clubbing on a Friday night. That costume was dated and kind of dumb.
Next time, take the fucking hit!
Anyway, they're similar to Leon and Claire in the sense that they're both good for the sake of being good, and there's not really that much broad character development going on here with either of them. The key difference is that their training backgrounds have been updated to match the more action-oriented tone of Resident Evil 3. See, as where in RE2 the main duo were a rookie cop heading in for his first day on the job and a street-smart civilian, Jill has not only had years of combat training, but she's also had to face off against the bioweapons Umbrella's been cooking up underneath the city before. And Carlos makes up for the lack of experience in fighting those bioweapons by carrying around a CQBR assault rifle on top of his pistol. Jill's got a nice variety of weapons too though, including a shotgun, a grenade launcher, and a magnum, on your first playthrough at least. Both of them move a little quicker than Leon and Claire too, and they also have the ability to dodge enemy attacks. As Jill, if you get the timing just right, it slows down for a few seconds after so you can get a few extra headshots in, and as Carlos, you punch whatever's trying to kill you so hard it'll either stun it or knock it on its ass. To make up for the balance changes that come from that increased mobility though, RE3 throws way more zombies at you to deal with while you're running back and forth between buildings in Raccoon City. The combat updates work, but they're not perfect. I think it's because whereas RE2's combat was built from the ground up to make the game as scary as possible, RE3 is starting where it left off. The zombies in this game still have the same weight to them as they did in RE2, but they're less scary because they don't usually have the upper hand of cornering you in a pitch black hallway like they did in that game. So because of that, the just add more mentality with the zombies works well for the most part, especially when you're being chased by Nemesis through the streets of Raccoon City, because they'll whittle down your health real quick if you aren't paying attention. Where it doesn't really work so well is in the hospital and surprisingly the RPD, since both have small rooms with 4 or 5 zombies attacking Carlos at once, but the space is definitely tiny enough that if you toss a grenade generally towards the center, it's a guaranteed room clear for at least a few minutes, and that removes the sense of fear entirely. But the tone in this game is different enough that if it constantly deprived you of ammo and only made you fight 1 or 2 zombies at a time, I think it would result in an empty feeling game, and that's a point a lot of reviewers I think are missing. For example, one of my favorite reviewers on here is SkillUp. His reviews are well written, his points are articulate, and it's clear he puts a lot of time into them to make sure he's saying the right stuff. But in his review of this game, he made a statement that literally made me spit my coffee out onto my desk.
The brilliance of the Resident Evil 2 remake was that it knew how to use combat sparingly, because combat in Resident Evil games is not fun. It's not meant meant to be fun. It's meant to feel slow and clunky and difficult.
Now, I completely understand that this is his opinion and he's totally entitled to it, but I couldn't disagree more. Combat in modern Resident Evil games, especially in 7 and the 2 remakes, treat your weapons in a way that makes them behave in a more believable way than something like Gears of War or Call of Duty. If you throw your gun up and pull the trigger haphazardly, you might get lucky and land a hit, but chances are you're probably going to miss. But if you stop and think for a second and take the time to put some distance between you and a zombie so that you have enough of it to aim down the sights long enough for the reticle to close before you fire, your bullet is going to go exactly where you're aiming. And what SkillUp is saying in his video is not an anomaly either. I can't tell you how many reviews I've read and watched for both remakes that make it seem like you have to avoid combat at all costs or you'll never make it through the game, whereas in reality, I played these games extremely aggressively and I was never punished for it. In fact, now that I think about it, both games clearly rewarded me for playing this way. In Resident Evil 3, I decided to try and fight Nemesis the first time he showed up, even though every preview I read said to do otherwise. And guess what? He dropped an extended mag for Jill's pistol and was stunned for almost 30 seconds, which gave me more than enough time to run away. If I took the time to line up my shots and always aim for the head, I found that I'd get a critical hit more often than not, which satisfyingly blows up the zombie's head and kills it permanently. And in the instances where I felt like I was getting overwhelmed, I would use other tools like the grenade launcher or flashbangs to stun the zombies and give me an edge. Sure, I might be a little less equipped for a boss fight down the line, but both games were good about providing a couple extra tools to give me a leg up before a big encounter like that anyway. Inventory management and shot placement have always been two of the key pillars of Resident Evil, and that hasn't changed here despite the scale tipping a little bit towards the action side of things. And I'm sorry, but if you're not keeping that in mind, especially on higher difficulties, you're simply playing the game wrong. And to me, this combat is fun, and I genuinely think most people who play these games would agree. I mentioned at the beginning of my video that I wasn't expecting this to be the controversial game release this year, and what I meant by that is that this game, even by Resident Evil standards, is pretty short. My first playthrough only took me around 5 hours, and every single playthrough I've done after that, I've been able to shave hours off the total playtime. I mean, there's a trophy or an achievement, depending on where you're playing, for beating this game in 2.5 hours. If you played RE2 last year, you're probably saying, wait a minute, it only took me around 6 hours to clear that game too. The difference here is that this one doesn't have an A-B scenario like the last one, so once you beat it, that's the end. There's no New Game Plus or true ending to chase either. Instead, once you finish the game for the first time, you can spend points you earn by playing on key items, new weapons, new costumes, and other buffs to make subsequent playthroughs easier. The fact that the campaign is short doesn't really bother me because adding more content for the sake of making the game longer when the story doesn't demand it always results in a worse game. And in revisiting RE2 for this video, one area that really started to wear on me a little more each playthrough was the item collection puzzles. Some of them are pretty tricky the first time around, like putting the chest pieces where they need to go to divert power in the sewers, but really those are only there to make your first playthrough feel longer than it is. When you come back around the second time, it's so much easier because you remember where stuff goes. My favorite puzzles in these games are the ones that don't break up the pace of the gameplay, like getting the combat knife or the bolt cutters in both RE2 and RE3 and using them to access new areas you couldn't before. That's fun to me. Another reason I like them is because the backtracking you have to do to solve them means you'll usually have more combat opportunities, and it adds a layer of stress from having enough ammo to get there but maybe not enough to get back. The modern Resident Evil games are all about immersion to me, and nothing breaks it faster than having to figure out how to divert power with oversized chess pieces. With RE3 generally having bigger levels built around winding streets, maze-like power plant corridors, and barricaded hospital doors, it's harder to make a mental map to blindly follow from safe room to safe room like I had after a couple hours in the RPD. But I gotta say, as much as I hate the sewer section in RE2, the power plant in 3 is a joke. It's nice looking for sure, and I like the idea of being trapped in a maze with a bunch of overgrown fleas because they're disgusting and honestly terrifying the first time you see them, but this maze as a whole doesn't feel fleshed out enough at all. You can sprint through it in about 2 minutes, and the fleas are essentially harmless other than the fact that the devs gave them some bullshit attack where Jill just sits back and lets them lay eggs in her throat. I know I praised the new character model a little earlier, but the cutscene that plays when this happens is off-putting for all the wrong reasons. Like, she doesn't even react, and once the eggs are inside Jill, if you don't have any herbs, you're straight up f***ed. It's basically a death warrant. And yeah, like I said, you can get through it in 5 minutes, but if they had more levels to begin with, this one wouldn't have stood out as such a sore point for the game. And a place where RE3 definitely makes up for having less levels is in its overall presentation. Since the story isn't split up between 2 characters, the team put a ton of work into building out some really cool action-packed cinematics instead of having the characters stand still talking to each other in-game like they did in RE2. Because of that, from a simply storytelling perspective, I think RE3 does a noticeably better job than the last game.
You're damn right.
Having the handicap of the same core story needing to be slightly altered so that it could support 2 main characters meant that plot elements like Leon falling for Ada, Claire looking for Chris, and the tragic story of William Birkin took a major backseat to the environmental aspects of the storytelling. Both Leon and Claire were also introduced to the world as fresh characters who were picking up the plot points at the same time we were. So the fact that RE3 lets you play as 2 characters who already know what's going on for the most part, the core story beats are way stronger. And as terrifying as he is in RE2, Mr. X just shows up at the RPD with the cliche goal of tying up loose ends. Nemesis, on the other hand, is hunting Jill down because she knows way too much, and Carlos has to grapple with the fact that he's working with the bad guys as the story unravels. So when he finally makes it to the hospital and watches that video diary from Bard, it's easy to see why he's suddenly so compelled to help her take down Umbrella rather than just escape. And look, I definitely think RE2's core story being a fight for survival and beating the Doomsday Clock by escaping Raccoon City is good. It's simple and it means every little detail revealed about what caused the outbreak actually matters. I love the stories in the remakes even more when I think about how Umbrella is still just this overwhelming sense of global power that's kind of nebulous instead of being a villain factory run by Albert Wesker, who became a complete joke by RE6. But the fact of the matter is that Jill has tangible goals like saving refugees and getting a vaccine for the T-virus out of the city, and that makes her a much more memorable and compelling character than either Leon or Claire were in Resident Evil 2. I mean, do people love Leon based on his first appearance in the original Resident Evil 2, or do they love the actual character he becomes in RE4? I think it's the later. But as good as I think the story is, I will say it felt like it was missing a beat between Jill escaping the subway station through the sewers and the second big Nemesis boss fight. After looking up the level list for the original game, it turns out that there's a whole clock tower mission missing that I don't think there's really any excuse for taking out, since one of the Carlos missions is a Cliff's Notes run through the RPD. To be clear though, even though it's essentially an asset flip to add length to the game, the saving grace is that it meticulously sets up the moments and characters for their appearances in RE2. Marvin receives the incapacitating bite wound from Brad Vickers, who is in the process of turning as he attacks him. That's followed by a scene where Carlos makes his way down the hallway to the 2nd and 3rd floor staircase, and he sees the Licker's tongue shred one cop's face and presumably hook the other. Carlos also causes an inconvenience for Leon and or Claire by detonating C4 in the showers, which then makes a pipe burst and creates a wall of boiling hot steam. Oh, and something I didn't realize until I went back to RE2 to get some footage is that the boards you can use to close up the windows in the RPD are actually boxes you can break with your knife playing as Carlos in RE3. Beefing up the continuity is a small detail that I think is really important because it builds that sense of immersion I was talking about earlier, and that's something that video games have always struggled with, especially back in the 90s. It really comes down to the fact that dead time isn't usually shown between big moments in movies or TV shows, but in games, big time jumps can come off pretty jarring because you're spending so much time with these characters. Also, one of my biggest points of criticism with RE2's remake is even if you play all 4 combinations of the A-B scenarios, there are way too many continuity errors to give it a pass. If you don't know what I'm talking about, a great example is when Jill just gets knocked out for 12 hours when Nemesis infects her with the T-virus. You'd think at any point a zombie would come up and bite her or a Licker would start eating her. Like, there are so many opportunities for her to die at that point, but the game just says, nah, we're skipping ahead 12 hours, and it feels weird. Thankfully, Carlos's other sequence in the Spencer Memorial Hospital is good enough that it manages to match and almost clear the high bar set by RE2's best moments. He has to make his way through to find a vaccine to cure Jill after she's infected with the T-virus by Nemesis, and reading the different documents laying around and getting the full story on the hospital's downfall was equal parts terrifying and heartbreaking. Oh, and the hospital itself is dripping in Halloween 2 vibes, and just like that movie, it's a genuinely creepy setting, only it's even creepier in the game thanks to the horde of zombies near the lobby and the hunters crawling around on the 2nd floor. It's weird because they exist to help people, but hospitals are scary. The hallways stretch out in front of you and seem like they go on forever, and there's not a lot of variety in the way they're laid out, so they're inherently hard to navigate. They're also essential during emergencies that you'd expect to knock out power, like a zombie apocalypse, and the dim hallway lights that kick in when the power goes out make the whole thing even creepier. I'm sure one of the big reasons most of Halloween 2 takes place in 1 is because it was cheap to shoot there at night, but it turned out to be one of the best settings a slasher movie could ever have. So with a game like Resident Evil 3, which takes place in the 90s, all of the same rules apply, and unsurprisingly, soaking the walls with blood and closing off portions where the patients died and came back to life is an improvement on perfection. It all comes to a head when Carlos has to defend Jill from a horde of zombies crawling through the front windows, and that reminded me of Resident Evil 4's completely optional mission at the beginning when you have to defend a cabin from a bunch of enemies on top of a chainsaw guy. Another issue I have is that the Nemesis character as a whole suffers from the cut down in content too, because the jump from having him stalk you through Raccoon City to him becoming essentially a massive animal is really abrupt. I think if the clock tower level was included, and in addition to fighting T-virus infected spiders, an enraged, mutating Nemesis stalked you through the level before morphing into the version you fight right after that, the whole game would benefit greatly. With that being said though, each and every boss fight with Nemesis is well thought out, and figuring out the combat puzzle to defeat him had my heart racing every time. Those boss fights all build up to an arena fight where on top of dodging his attacks and blowing him off the side of a wall with a grenade launcher, you also have to deal with multiple zombies while making precision shots to electrocute him. Oh, and that's followed up by a final fight where you shoot him through the mouth with a 15-foot long railgun, and even though I felt like he could have been in the game more, it felt really good permanently putting him down. As good as the campaign is in Resident Evil 3 though, the lack of content really starts to look bad when you compare it to Resident Evil 2's post-game, which not only rewarded you with the true ending cutscene for finishing it twice, but also unlocked the fourth survivor and tofu survivor modes. And a couple months later, Capcom released the free DLC pack called Ghost Survivors, which let you play some short story levels as side characters from the main game. In all fairness, there is a little cliffhanger after the credits in RE3, which means Capcom might release some DLC down the line, but as of now, it's not announced. And as far as RE2 goes, having extra content is absolutely meaningless to me if it isn't good, and while I think the fourth survivor mode and beating the game twice to see the true ending was definitely worth it, the tofu mode and the ghost survivor modes were mediocre at best. Like honestly, I'd be surprised if anyone actually put in the time to play all of this content, because I did, and most of it felt like a chore. The real twist of the knife here for a lot of people though is that the mercenaries mode that shipped with the original game is also missing, and it's been replaced with a standalone multiplayer game called Resident Evil Resistance. Now the code I got for this new game on PC didn't come with an extra one for Resistance, and it also wasn't added to my library at launch, so I haven't been able to play the final version. Thankfully, I was able to download the beta and play a few rounds with my friends, and while I think the core Dead by Daylight-esque idea is cool, it's definitely not ready for prime time. One of the biggest issues is that everyone playing as a survivor has to connect to the host, which is the mastermind, and if their internet connection sucks, you're going to see a message telling you there's a weak connection for pretty much the entire game, and the font is really big and it's pretty annoying. And on top of that, there's a full 1 second delay between shooting an enemy and the damage number ticking off their head, and that is just horrible. It makes the game feel like it's lagging, and it just ruins the whole feedback loop you got from the single player game. Finally, the matchmaking in Resistance just sucks. It takes forever to get into a round, and then when that wraps up, it takes even longer to get you into the next one, and you'll probably get kicked back to the menu, so we wrapped up our session pretty quick. So while yeah, Resistance could eventually become something worth digging into, right now it's not. Despite my issues with content in the half-baked multiplayer mode, it's really easy to recommend this game to anyone who's invested in the Resident Evil story and they want to see where it all started in a really cool, modernized way. Even though he doesn't show up enough in his first form, Nemesis is still terrifying, and honestly, I'd rather be left wanting more than annoyed that he's in the game too much, which is definitely not what I think. That being said though, I do see why it's hard for people to overlook the fact that this is a sequel to another game that has about double the content for the same price. And yeah, while I would have liked another level in the middle of the game to really even things out, what we do have here doesn't feel rushed or any less detailed than what we got last year in Resident Evil 2 or what we got a few years ago in Resident Evil 7. It's just fun to play, plain and simple. And this game has zero glitches. I mean, how often is it that you get a game like this that releases day one without a massive patch, and I think it's only 18 gigabytes on top of that? Like, good job, Capcom. And considering that no other publisher has picked up on the fact that survival horror is big again and people actually want to play these games. I mean, EA isn't bringing back Dead Space anytime soon because they're the worst publisher in the industry. Tango Gameworks is moving on from The Evil Within after their sequel, which was pretty much perfect. And Konami, for some reason, is so scared to bring back Silent Hill in the right way, or at least even a similar way to Resident Evil. I just don't get it. So yeah, while this is a little bit slimmer of a package than we got last year, I'm happy to play it because Resident Evil 8 is coming out in a year allegedly, and we'll just have more to play then. So until we start getting more games in this genre, I'm totally happy to play whatever Capcom gives me. But if you think $60 is a little steep for what you're getting here, just wait until it's $40 in a few weeks. I know this game's gonna go on sale pretty quick, and that'll send a message to Capcom saying, hey, I expect more content in my $60 game. So that's what I thought of the remake of Resident Evil 3. Let me know if you plan on checking it out or if you've already played it down in the comments below. And if you want to see more deep dive gaming videos like this, make sure you let me know by subscribing, hitting the like button, and also turning on notifications and setting them to all. So whenever I do a video like this that isn't a Halloween video, you'll actually get a notification about it. Anyway guys, my name is Jimmy Champagne and I'll see you in the next one. Shape on.